Okay, so what we want to do now is we have actually one of two choices. We could either fast forward now to the Mishnah Daf Ayin, which is the next major sugya here in Ben Soromora, or we can spend a little bit more time on the question about whether we rely on Rov in Dinei Nefashos, and we can kill a person based on Rov, which was the Gemara in Chulin that was quoted by the Ran, that we're not worried about the miyut of treifa, that maybe the victim was a treifa, but we'll kill the rotzeach in any event. But we said that is a case where we have no way of possibly salvaging the parsha of killing a rotzeach, putting a rotzeach to death, because we cannot check. We don't have a way of making a bedika, of investigating and determining whether, in fact, the nirtzach was a treif or was not a treif. But as far as Ben Soromora is concerned, we could certainly lower and reduce the amount of time of candidacy as a Ben Soromora to be put to death from 3 months after Shtei Saras down to 2 1/3 months. And therefore, we don't know that Rov, again, because if he impregnates a woman, she'll carry the full term, and therefore it's 3 months till Hukar Uber, and so forth and so on, until he's Roy Likos Ish, Likos Av. We don't know that in that case, we rely on Rov. And it would seem from the Gemara here on Daf Samach Tes that Ravina proved that we will rely on Rov even to set up the shiur of Roy Likroso Av and to put him to death after the 2 1/3 months, before the 3 months. And the proof was from the case of 2 Eidim. And the Rov there was Rov Inshi Tobi Ibur Diyarcha. Most people walking on the street, they don't know whether or not the previous month was a 30-day month or a 29-day month. And the question is, there, we're talking about a Rov of the world, and this doesn't seem to have anything to do with what we called Kviyah Shiurim, to decide what's the shear of Roy Likroso Av. So how did Ravina, this is where we got stuck yesterday, how did Ravina prove his shita that we could rely on Rov even to be konveya the shear of Ben Soromora, from the fact that with a discrepancy between 2 witnesses, we reconcile that discrepancy and we kill the Rotzeach based on the Rov that lo bikiyin bikviyah diyar. That's what we got stuck yesterday. So I want to read to you a little bit from this paragraph that I have here in front of me, which again, I don't know, I can't remember whether or not you have it or not, but it's not relevant right now. I'll just read it very quickly. He says, Yeshlomar, the Afkan Chal Harov Likvoa Shiur. The Rov that people don't know whether or not it's a Chodesh Me'ubar or a Chodesh Chaser, that itself is a Rov to be Kovei Shir. What does that mean? Shir Hazman Sha'edim Toim Bi'edus HaChodesh. So when we interrogate the witnesses, we ask them, well, what day of the month did this occur? You're testifying about a story that occurred. Well, you have to tell me what time it occurred, and time means what day of the month it occurred on. And in fact, if he were to say, I don't remember when it happened, I just remember the story, but I don't ask me when it happened, then we throw out his ages. You can't say Eini Odea in Chakiros when they're being choker the Eidim. He's got to know the answer to the question, when did it happen? So if one aide testifies that it happened on the 2nd of the month and the second aide on the 3rd of the month, then again, how do we reconcile that apparent contradiction between the discrepancy between the two Eidim? Because the Eidim are required as an absolute requirement to tell me when it happened. So did it happen on the 2nd of the month or on the 3rd of the month? And basically what we're saying is that one of these two witnesses made a mistake. And it wasn't the 3rd, it was the 2nd, or it wasn't the 2nd, it was the 3rd. So in effect, he's basically saying any day. I don't know when it happened, because he's not giving me the right time. So how do we reconcile these two witnesses? He says, the Chazal kovu shir zman the choshiv sheyodim ha'edim es hazman shel ha'maisa. Right, there's going to be a certain extension or a period of time, a shear of time, a measurement of time, when we consider that the Eidim know when the time happened. They don't have to pinpoint it to a second or a fraction of a second. We have to set up give me did it happen within a week? Did it happen within 2 days? Did it happen within 1 day? How narrow of a time do we have to do they even have to pinpoint in order to avoid saying, I don't know when the time of the murder took place? You follow what I'm saying? Give them a certain shear of zman. We're not going to require that they pinpointed ad k'dei kach. Today they have clocks that record fractions of a second. We're not into that. Chazal kavu shir zman the choshev sheyodim ha'edim es hazman shel ha'mais the somchal harov rov in shito biyom echad. Most people will make a mistake of up to 1 day. Because they don't know whether again, as we said before, the previous month is Chaser or Mole. Lachein chal shir tos bizman. I would call it in English a margin of error. That's called the shir zman. We give you a margin of error. We're going to give you a time period where you may have made a mistake. And if we determine that you made a mistake, then okay, you made a mistake, but we're going to qualify and validate your aidus because that mistake that you made is acceptable. That's going to give you a shir of zman, a margin of error. Again, I don't know if this is a good mashal, but mashal dome, when a teacher gives an exam, there's a certain margin of error. Let's say they allow him to know 65%. He can make a mistake in the other 35%. Here also, we're going to give him a 1 day margin of error because justifiably he doesn't know the difference between last month's as a Chodesh Me'ubar, a Chodesh Chaser, and therefore, Somchal HaRov, we're going to use the Rov and rely on the Rov that Inshi To B'Yom Echad, that a person will make a mistake of 1 day. so that when we measure that margin of error, how long of a period of time they can still be within error, we're going to give them a full day. If they made a mistake of one day, a dusan kayemis, we will accept their aidus. And we validate it as if they had determined the time of the aidus, even though they're off by one day. But we give them that error. Right, we're setting up a shear, just like we set up a shear for Ben Sor Morer, a period of time in which he's chayiv. We have a shear of zman within which a person can make a tos, and the edus is considered valid as if he was koveh the shear of zman, even though he was off by a day. The shapir yeshraya mikan aflin Ben Sor Morer. And that's what Ravina wanted to prove from Edus to Ben Sor Morer. There's always going to be a shir of zman. If it's a shir of zman of Ben Sor Morer within which he's chayav and he'll get executed. If it's a shir of zman in how much of an error we allow the Edus to make when they are answering the question, when did this actually happen? And that's the way we're learning this Gemara. Okay. Now we're going to talk about islands. There's going to be another case in which we rely on Rov for Dinei Nefashos. That's the case of an islandess. And we're going to try to see if that case will also fit into this pattern of being koveh shir of zman. Omar Ab Yirmiyah Difti. So we're on the bottom now of Samach Pesam and Aleph. And we're going to count up 5 lines from the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Omar Ab Yirmiyah Difti Afanana Mitmina. I have a mission in Nida on Daf Mem Dalet and Beis to prove that in Dinei Nefashos we rely on Rov. And now we're talking about a katana. Her father accepted Kiddushin on her behalf, and now we're talking about Kiddushay Bir, Miskadeshes B'Bir. So we're not talking about a case where the father accepted a Shava Pruta for his young girl, but rather he gave her over for Bia, for Kiddushay Bir. She becomes an Eshes Ish through Kiddushay Bir. Now, if her husband dies and she has no children from him, so he died childless, but he has a brother, and that brother is now the Yavam, Ubaleh Yavam Kna. If his surviving brother has a relationship with this woman, which was his wife, then Kna. He was Kona through Bia, and she's his full-fledged wife. So, for example, if she would die, he would inherit her. Or if he's a Kohen, he's allowed to bury her when she dies. And she would require a get, which would again be delivered to the father. And there's no requirement of chalitza. Now, if he would give her for Kiddushin and receive Kesef for Kiddushin, she's Mekudeshes. If somebody has a relationship with her before her husband gives her a get, then he's going to be put to death as a boel eshes ish. Umetama es bol. If she was a nida and she's already 3 years old, then the boel becomes tameh because of boel nida. And that's l'tameh mishkav hatachton ke'elyon. So this is a very high-powered tumah of boel nida. And if he sleeps on a beged, even if he doesn't touch the beged becomes tameh. That's called mishkav tachton ke'elyon. Now, we have to know that a zav, if he carries something like a beged, then the beged that's carried by a zav is tameh. Okay, so now we have to get into issues about a rishon l'tumah and an avad tumah. All right, so let's just fast forward for a moment. L'tamei mishkav tachton ke'elyon. We'll talk about a beged shenisa al gabi zav, and it becomes what's called a rishon l'tumah. But tumas boel nida is the beged shanida shocheves olav nasa ava tumah. Okay, so now we have an upgrade in the severity of the tumah from a rishon l'tumah to an ava tumah. Because a rishon l'tumah is not mitame adam v'kelim, he's only mitame ochel mashkin, but tumas boel nida is not the same as tumas nida, because in the case of tumas nida, if the nida sleeps on top of a beged, that beged becomes an ava tumas mitame adam v'kelim. All right, well, this requires a lot of study, but let's just go on for a moment. Niseis l'kohen. So this Ketana is a Bas Yisrael, and she can marry a Kohen, and her father will accept Kedushin from a Kohen, and Ochels b'Truma, now she can eat Truma. Baal Echad min Apsulim is Psola min Akudah. If, let's say, a guy has a relationship with her, or a chalal, or a nasid, or a mamzer, then she's disqualified for kuhun. She can never marry a kohen. If she's a bas kohen or a Yisraelis that's married to a kohen, she can no longer eat truma because she had a bia with echad min apsul. Bo'aleh echad mikol harayos hamuras b'Torah mumasim oleh v'hi petura. And she's a ketana, and she's not a bas onshi. So here we turn to Samach Tesam and Beis. So again, we said that if her father marries her off and somebody has bia with her, he's chayav mishum eshes ish. Amai, how can we put to death a person who has a relationship with this Tana who's only 3 years old? Ema island is he. Maybe we'll find out that this woman is really an islandess. Now, if she's an islandess, then adaiti dachilo kiddush. We have what's called kiddushay tov. She was never neshes ish. So how could the Baal Lev be Chayav Nisa L'Lav Damrin and Zil Basaruba the Rov Nashim Lav Islandios? We have to assume that we're not Choshish for Rov. I'm sorry, we're not Choshish for Islanders because we rely on the Rov. Rov Nashim are not Islanders. So what happens now with Rav Huda's pasuk Vitzilu Ha'eda, that we should not rely on Rov to kill a condemned criminal, but rather we should be Choshish for Mir. Maybe she is an island. And the Kedushin are Kedushin Tov. So again, we want to clarify whether this girl who's 3 years old and was married off by her father, whether she's an islandess or not. I mean, that's a question of Itzius. We already saw in the Gemara Chulin that if you have a question of Itzius, whether the victim was a treif or not, then you rely on Rov. That wasn't the Chiddush here of Ravina. Ravina's Chiddush in Ben Mora that even for Kviyah Shiurim, we're going to rely on Rov. And we could be kover the shear of Roy Leos Av based on the Rov, and that's going to be 3 months. So how does the Gemara prove Ravina from this case of islandess that most women are not on islandess? This Rabbi Yirmiyah Difti. That's just simply a case of Metzius. So I'll read to you a few lines here. He says, Yesh l'taretz, Yesh l'achor b'din azlina basaruba b'ruba delesa kamon. Right, we have a rov in the natural universe that most people are healthy. Most women give birth after 9 months. Most women are not islanders. That's called a ruba delesa kamon. Ha'ima rov mevarer, does the rov clarify? And we have no suffix. We are so convinced by the rov that we have no suffix at all. Oh, alternatively, the yesh ledas hasafek. There is a suffix. Eladah rov machria es hasafek. It's not a din of birur, but rather a din of achra. What's the difference between birur and achra? In the case of birur, we don't have a suffix. We've already clarified it. So how does rov work? Does rov work as a birur, and the nafkamina is that it's not a suffix, or do we say no? There's a suffix here, but the Torah says rely on rov. So what happens if you shecht an animal and you have a doubt as to whether or not the animal is a kosher animal? Or maybe you have a doubt whether or not the shechita is a kosher shechita. So we have a rov that tells me it's kosher. So now the question is, do we have to check the animal after shechita? And do a post-mortem dissection of its vital parts to determine whether it was a healthy animal or it was a treifa. And now it should depend upon rov. If rov is a birur, so we already clarified the suffix, and the rov tells me that this is a healthy animal. We don't have to bother checking it and do that investigation. But if we say that rov is only achra on haga, really the suffix remains a suffix. Then if it's efshal mibdak, if we can check the inner organs and determine that this was a healthy animal, we're not going to rely on rov, and we're obligated to do this bedika. So what would you say? I'm just curious, if I can invoke your intuitive response. I shechted an animal. Rov tells me that this animal had no problems, it's kosher, but I could do a bedika. It might be a little bit of a pain, but I could check the innards of the animal. The Torah says rely on rov, and the rov tells me that you won't find anything problematic in the innards of the animal. You won't find a nail punctured through its lung. Do I have to do a bedika on it? Or can I just rely on rov and I don't need a bedika? Well, what's your intuitive response?
You would do the bedika.
Okay, maybe, but it depends. That's the kind of answer I'm looking for.
What's that?
Two ways of learning rov. And that's going to answer our question whether you need a bedika or not. What are the two ways of learning rov? Either that rov clarifies the reality, that's called a birur, and the Torah says the rov tells me what the reality is, that it's a healthy animal. Well, no, the Torah's not saying that the rov will tell me it's a healthy animal. Maybe it's not a healthy animal. The rov, in most cases, it is a healthy animal, but maybe this belongs to the minority. The Torah says that if you have no other choice and there's no possibility of clarifying the suffix, then go ahead and rely on rov. But if you have a possibility of clarifying the suffix, then don't rely on rov. Rov is a fallback position if you can't, in an event that you cannot clarify. Then go ahead and do the bedika, like you said before, Steve. But if, on the other hand, I would tell you that rov is a birur, and the Torah says that rov is evidence and clarifies the reality, so there's no longer a suffix, then I don't have to do a bedika because I have no suffix. The only reason why I have to do a bedika, this internal investigation, is because of the suffix. So the Ramban in Chulin Adaf Gimel says that it depends upon what kind of a mute you have. He says there are two categories of a mute. There's a miyut hamatzui and a miyut she'eno matzui. Let's say you have there's a 20% chance. Okay, 20%, 1 out of 5. That's matzui. But you can have a miyut she'eno matzui. Let's say you have 1%, 2%. 98% tells me it's kosher. So Ramban writes, in a miyut matzui chayav bika. If there's a significant minority, we gave the example 20%, then you have to do a bedika. Masha enke b'miyut she'eno matzui, 2%, eno tzarich livdok. As I state in Ramban. V'nireh, v'ksheyesh miyut hamatzui, we call it 20%, az chal ledas hasofek. You already have a suffix. The az ein harov chal elamidin hanhaga v'achra. So again, according to the Ramban, you have a miyut matzu, you have 20%, then the suffix is a valid suffix, and therefore, although you can rely on rove if you have no choice in the matter, and that's the fallback position, but if you can check it out and determine what the reality, what the mitzias is, then you're chayv b'dika. You're not going to rely on rove because you have a miyut matzu, and a miyut matzu lowers the power and the authority of the rove, such that we only rely on that rove when we have no other way of clarifying the suffix. If it's, let's say, only a percentage point or 2 percentage points, then the rove clarifies everything. So let's try to think about the case of a ketana. And she's an Eishes Ish because her father received Kedusha, but maybe she's an islandess. And if she turns out to be an islandess, then the Kedusha was never valid. So how are you going to put to death the Baal Eishes Ish? Maybe she's an islandess. So the Gemara answers rove. You have rove that tells you that she is not an island. What kind of rove is that? Or to be more precise, what kind of miyut is it? It's two sides of the same coin. Is it a miyut matzu with the suffix, or is it miyut she'ena matzu? Habalak tana mumasim al yodim ahargin also miyad. Already talking she island. Vaminim gemara das lina basaruba. The lav island is ahargin also miyad. Mitzarchiyun. Already yicholim lahamtin la shetinda. Why do we put this guy to death? Let's wait till we determine whether she's an islandess or not. B'tzarchlomer to rove noshim. Why aren't we going to wait before we put this guy to death? Lav island is ninu havi rove shechal midin biru, meaning it's a rove without a miyut matzu. Farov mevara the leko ledas hasofek klal. We're not even going to raise the issue that maybe she's an islandess, because islandess is a miyut she'eno matzu. Ulefize yeshlomar the Gemara mochicha the kmod legabe islandess chala rov midin biru. The lek afilu ledas hasofek the shemi islandess. Ubishmochi ein tzarich lasos bedika levara she'ena islandess. K'mochein af gabe kvias shiurim the ben soru mora chal harov midin biru. The lek afilu ledas hasofek. Gabi roy lias av if they give him kadoshim. The yesh miyut she'eno matzui she'tele b'shiva kadoshim. Again, I don't know what percentage of women give birth prematurely. Can you Google that? Is it 10%? Probably less. I don't know. I'm not sure. is harov chalmi did biru the leka leda sasofik klal. Notice the percentage points of leda shiva is so low, is such a low statistical probability that the rove is chalmi did biru, like in the case of a Suffolk Island. The leka leda sasofik klal. I don't know. I'm a little uncomfortable assuming that the probability or likelihood of her giving birth prematurely is Eino Motzui Klal. That's what he says. You have to convert it into statistical percentages. Umafkias latest asomig moel aflik bias shiurim. Meaning if it's a motzui mida motzui, the oz chal latest asofik, as I shlomer the talking likvo ashir the royal lios abishnei chadoshim ushlish chodesh kipi amiu. So basically, if I understand correctly, what the Gemara is trying to prove from the case of Kana Bas Shalosh Shonim, that her father received Kiddushin on her behalf, and now he was somebody else was boel her, and he's chayav mishum eishes isha. We're not going to wait to clarify whether she's an islandess. It means that if you have a rove that's a very strong, powerful rove, and the miyud is a miyud that's very weak, it's Eino Matsui, then there's no suffix at all, and there's no need to be bodek, meaning to wait that period of time until we actually clarify 100% that she's not an islandess. We don't need to clarify that. And the Gemara is saying that if you see that robe is so powerful that we can put a person to death without even going through the birur process, because the robe is powerful enough to remove a suffix, then we're going to apply the same logic, says Ravina, to the case of Ben Sor Mor. We're going to put him to death, and we're not going to be choshesh that maybe she would have had a pregnancy and a premature birth, because the rove is mavarek, complete birur, and there's no suffix at all. It's a miyud she'eino motzi. So even though we're dealing with kriya shiurim, but nevertheless, there's no suffix over here. Now, what's going to remove the suffix? It's going to be a rove without a miyut matzui. I'm just curious, are you able to Google this question? What percentage of pregnant women will give birth prematurely? Can you type that in for me? Maybe you'll get an answer.
I mean, I looked, it said 10%, so that's
Wow.
prior to 37 weeks. And because normally it's 40 weeks. So I think they consider the premature as prior to 37 weeks.
But let's say 7 months would be how many weeks? 28?
7 months?
Yeah, it'd be 4 times 7.
Yeah, so that would be like
28.
30 weeks.
30 weeks.
7 months is about 30 weeks.
30 weeks. So can you ask
Let's see.
Mr. Google What percentage of women will give birth after 30 weeks of pregnancy? But that might lower it by a few points. Nothing's coming up or what?
Okay, so it's about 2%.
Oh, I'm excited, although I don't believe it, but I'm a skeptic. But if it's true, then I'm very excited because that would explain. That's what I said before, that if 98%, that would mean a miyut shein matzui, then it's a birur and there's no latest hasafek. You don't even have to do a bedika and you don't even have to clarify it. And therefore we could put to death this ben sorer morer under the assumption that he's not royally cross av until 3 months for a regular, normal, full-term pregnancy, because the possibility that he made a woman impregnated and she'll give birth after 30 weeks is 2%, and that's not considered on the Richter scale, the latest hasafek, and we don't even have to wait to check this out, and we can put him to death immediately. And we found a source, or shall we say a precedent for that, in the case of islandess, that we're not going to wait until she's 20 years old to determine whether she's an islandess or not. We can put the bowl to death immediately without waiting and without doing a bedika, because we've already clarified this subject, because the percentage points of islandess are so low that it's a miyut shein matzui, and the rove therefore so powerful at 98% that it removes the suffix at all completely. Okay, so this is where we're going to stop for today. What I'd like to do tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, is excuse me, fast forward to what do we call it, to the Mishnah on Daf